By midnight, $30 million in peer contracts and shipping routes, one mafia capo's reputation, and the balance of power on a New Jersey waterfront would begin to collapse because Marco Varelli made one lazy mistake. He looked at Evelyn Marlowe's body and decided a woman that large could be frightened into silence. He saw a soft, heavy, plus-size cook in a stained apron, pale-skinned and broad-hipped, with full arms and a presence too commanding for the narrow back kitchen of Marlowe's Salt House. Lucian Belandi, the most dangerous man on Blackwater Pier, was about to see something else entirely. Rain slammed against the rear steel door hard enough to rattle the hanging knives. Inside the walking glow of fluorescent lights, Evie stood behind the fish-cutting table with both palms flat on cold stainless steel, breathing slowly through the smell of salt, lemon, bleach, and blood. Her body filled the space with a quiet, undeniable gravity. She was large in a way people noticed before they noticed her face, large enough that men smirked when she passed, large enough that rich women at the front tables lowered their voices and still made sure she heard. But she did not shrink. Not tonight. Not with three men in black suits blocking the only exit. Lucian Belandi stood in the center of her kitchen like a verdict in a tailored coat. White, Italian-American, immaculate, silent. His black suit had not taken a drop of rain. His shoes cost more than Evie's oven. Two bodyguards flanked him with hands loose near their jackets. But it was Lucian's stillness that made the room feel armed. He did not shout. Men like him never had to. "Miss Marlowe," he said, voice low enough to make the refrigerators sound loud. "You have something that belongs to me." Evie felt the old humiliation rise, hot and familiar, from somewhere beneath her ribs. Marco had made sure of that. He had made sure the whole room saw her body before they saw her evidence. He had made sure Lucian came to this kitchen expecting a desperate, broke, fat woman with nowhere to run. But Marco had miscalculated one thing. Evie Marlowe did not survive by running. She survived by noticing where men put their hands, where their shoes left water, where a crate number had been rewritten, where a weapon was hidden beneath a towel. "I run a kitchen," Evie said. "Not your peer." One bodyguard stepped forward. "Careful." Evie's eyes flicked to his wrist, then to the wet floor beneath Lucian's left shoe, then to the oyster knife lying beneath the folded towel. A small shift, a breath. Lucian noticed her noticing. For the first time, his gaze sharpened. "You're not scared enough," he murmured. The words should have broken something in her. Instead, they settled her. Evie let her shoulders drop. Let them think her size made her slow. Let them see softness and miss strength. When Lucian reached for her chin, as if men like him still owned the right to make women look up, Evie moved. Her hand locked around his wrist. Her hip turned. Her weight drove down and through him with the brutal certainty of a woman who had hauled ice, lifted barrels, and survived being underestimated her entire life. Lucian hit the steel table with a sharp breath. Before either bodyguard could clear a gun, the oyster knife was in Evie's hand, its narrow blade resting against the pale skin just above his collar. The kitchen went dead silent. Then, refrigerators. One drop of blood sliding into Lucian Belandi's white shirt. Evie leaned close, trembling only where no one could see. "Your man is selling your peer," she whispered. "Shoot me, and you'll never know which shipment kills you." Lucian did not blink. He looked at the knife, then at her face, then at the crate with the wrong blue number. And instead of ordering her death, the mafia boss smiled like he had just found the first honest thing in his empire. But 40 minutes before Evelyn Marlowe ever put a knife to Lucian Belandi's throat, she was still carrying chowder through a dining room that treated her body like a public inconvenience. The bowl of chowder was hot enough to burn through Evie Marlowe's fingers, but she carried it across the dining room without flinching. Marlowe's Salt House was packed tight with dock workers, merino wives, city brokers, and men in expensive coats who treated the old seafood restaurant like a place to eat quietly before doing criminal business loudly somewhere else. Evie moved between the tables with practiced care, broad-hipped, soft-bellied, heavy with exhaustion, her stained black apron tied around a body the room noticed before it noticed her face. Chairs sat too close. Elbows drifted into her path. Someone's designer purse blocked the aisle, and when Evie had to turn sideways to pass, a woman in pearls gave a tiny smile that was worse than a laugh. "Excuse me," Evie said, calm and professional. The woman pulled the purse back 2 inches, not enough to help, just enough to make a point. Evie felt the old heat rise in her throat, but she kept the bowl level. She had learned years ago that spilling anything gave people permission to call clumsiness what was really cruelty. At table 6, a businessman looked her up and down before glancing at the kitchen doors. "That the owner," he murmured to his date. "Thought she was kitchen help." Evie set down the chowder, placed the spoon beside it, and said nothing. Her silence had weight. So did she. And she had stopped apologizing for either. Near the service station, Marco Virelli leaned against the bar like he owned the floor beneath it. Rain darkened the shoulders of his coat, and his signet ring flashed black under the low amber lights. He had been there for 20 minutes, watching Evie work, watching the room watch her, waiting for the right amount of public discomfort. "Busy night, Evie," he said when she passed. "Your father would be proud, assuming he could afford to keep the lights on." Her hand tightened around the empty tray. Just once. Then she let go. "If you're here for dinner, order. If you're here for money, come back when you learn how invoices work." A couple of dockworkers looked down fast to hide their smiles. Marco's expression stayed pleasant, but something meaner moved behind it. "Careful. Women who take up too much room shouldn't make more enemies than they can carry." Evie met his eyes long enough to show him she had heard every word and given him none of what he wanted. Then the kitchen bell rang, and she turned away before he could see the wound land. By the time she looked back, Marco was gone, leaving only rainwater beneath the bar stool and the smell of expensive tobacco behind. At the back counter, beside the stacked plates, the ice delivery clipboard sat half-buried beneath vendor receipts. Evie noticed the blue grease pencil number before she meant to. BWP 17. The same code had appeared twice that week, but the handwriting was wrong. The 7 had crossbar. Eddie from Bayonne never crossed his 7s. And the last crate of ice had smelled faintly of ammonia and diesel, sharp enough to cut through lemon and brine. Evie flipped the page with nicked fingers, pretending to check the soup count while her pulse changed. Different truck. Noimboy stump. Delivery logged at 9:43, long after the normal route closed. A wrong number could be a clerical error. A wrong smell could be bad storage. A wrong truck, wrong time, wrong handwriting, and Marco vanishing before Lucian arrived was not a mistake. Then the front door opened, and the room forgot how to breathe. Lucian Bellandi stepped inside with 2 bodyguards behind him, rain sliding off black wool, his silence colder than the weather. He did not look around like a customer. He looked once, and the restaurant arranged itself around his presence. Voices dropped. Forks paused. The bar stool where Marco had stood was empty now. Evie saw that too. Lucian's eyes moved over the room, over the empty stool, over the clipboard in Evie's hand, and stopped on her, as if she were not part of the furniture after all. Before anyone spoke, his phone buzzed once. His eyes dropped to the screen. Whatever was there made the warmth drain from the restaurant. When Lucian looked back at Evie, he was no longer seeing a tired cook holding paperwork. He was seeing a woman standing beside the first clue to a trap. Lucian read the message twice, then placed the phone face down on the bar with such controlled quiet that every person in Marlowe's salt house seemed to stop breathing around it. Evie saw the change before anyone else did. Not panic. Men like Lucian Bellandi did not panic. It was colder than that, a private door shutting somewhere behind his eyes. "Lock the front," he said. 2 words, barely louder than the rain. The younger bodyguard moved instantly. The waiter by the coffee machine lowered his gaze like he had been caught stealing. Even the merino wife in pearls stopped pretending not to listen. That was Lucian's power, Evie realized. He did not need to raise his voice because the city had trained itself to obey him before he asked twice. Outside, black SUVs rolled to the curb without headlights, silent and expensive, swallowing the view through the rain-streaked windows. Men in dark coats stepped out and took positions along the sidewalk, not rushing, not speaking, just rearranging the world by standing in it. A businessman at table 6 reached for his phone. Lucian's eyes flicked once in his direction. The phone went back into the man's pocket. Evie stood beside the bar with the clipboard pressed against her stomach, suddenly aware of every inch of herself beneath every stare. Her wide hips brushed the edge of a stool. Her apron pulled tight across her soft middle. Her arms, full and pale beneath rolled black sleeves, still smelled faintly of brine and steel. The room looked at her the way rooms always had. Too large for sympathy, too working class for respect, too visible to be invisible. "Should she be back there with the papers?" a woman whispered. "This is criminal business." Evie did not turn. She only smoothed the bent corner of the delivery sheet with one nicked thumb. Lucian heard it. His jaw shifted, but he did not defend her. Not yet. Instead, he watched whether she would break under the weight of being seen. Evie gave him nothing but steadiness. "Who sent the message?" she asked. One of Lucian's men looked offended that she had spoken at all. Lucian looked interested. "Marco," he said. The name moved through the room like a blade under silk. "He says you altered a shipment record and stole from my pier." A few people glanced at Evie's body before they glanced at her face, as if theft, hunger, and size belonged in the same ugly sentence. That old wound opened quietly. She felt it. She refused to bleed for them. "Then he lied badly," Evie said. "How do you know?" Lucian asked, not mocking, testing. Evie tapped the clipboard. "Because Marco never writes the number 7 with a crossbar. Whoever changed this code does. And the man who stepped through my back door tonight had mud from the south lot on his shoe, not the alley. South lot means dock office. Dock office means your people, not mine." The bodyguard beside Lucian went still. A tiny thing, but Evie caught it. So did Lucian. His eyes did not leave her face, yet the air around him sharpened toward his own man. "Bring Marco," Lucian said. The command was soft enough to be intimate and dangerous enough to make 3 servers take a step back. Evie felt the room tilt again, not in her favor, not yet, but away from certainty. For one impossible second, the most feared man on Blackwater Pier looked at her like she had touched a wire hidden inside his empire. Then the front door opened before the bodyguard could reach it. Marco Varelli walked in smiling, rain on his shoulders, 20 people watching, and raised his voice so the whole restaurant could hear. "There she is," he said. "The fat little thief who thought no one would search her kitchen." Marco let the word thief hang in the restaurant like spoiled meat. No one moved. Not the servers, not the dock workers at the bar, not the merino wives who suddenly found their wine glasses fascinating. Evie stood with the clipboard against her soft middle, feeling every stare land on the width of her body before it ever reached her face. Marco knew exactly where to cut. He walked toward her slowly, smiling with all the confidence of a man who had humiliated women in public and survived it every time. "Look at her," he said, spreading one hand toward the dining room. "You think she memorized shipment codes because she's loyal? No. Girls like Evie Marlowe spend their whole lives hungry for rooms they don't belong in." A cruel little laugh came from somewhere near the windows. It died the second Lucian Bellandy turned his head. He did not defend her. He did not need to. His silence became colder, more watchful, the kind of quiet that made guilty men start sweating. Marco ignored the warning because arrogance was louder than instinct. "She's not a business owner," Marco continued. "She's a cook with debt, a dead father's lease, and a body too big to disappear when she steals from men above her." Evie's fingers tightened on the clipboard until the paper bent. Her throat burned. For one second, she was 16 again, standing behind her father's counter while boys from the marina called her the whale in the kitchen and asked if the floorboards had insurance. She remembered her father telling her to keep her knife sharp, her books clean, and her chin level. So she did. She breathed once, slow. Then she set the clipboard on the bar without a sound. "If you're going to accuse me," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "use numbers. Cowards use adjectives." The room shifted. A waitress near the coffee machine covered her mouth. One of Lucian's bodyguards looked at Evie like he had expected tears and found steel instead. Lucian's gaze stayed on her, unreadable, but his hand had stopped moving around the silver lighter in his palm. Marco's smile thinned. "Numbers," he said. "Fine." He reached inside his coat and tossed a folded document onto the bar. Doc inventory shows 3 sealed crates missing from Bellandi Freight. Witness says they were moved through this kitchen. And since Miss Marlowe has been so interested in paperwork, maybe she can explain why one of Lucian's crates is sitting in her freezer. A ripple of shock ran through the room. This time, even her own staff looked at her. Not with cruelty. Worse, with doubt. Evie felt that doubt like a hand pressing between her shoulders. Marco had not come to argue. He had come to stage a hanging. "Open it," Marco said, "unless she needs time to hide behind all that dignity." Evie looked toward the back hall. At the freezer door, half hidden in shadow, a black wax seal glinted on a crate that had not been there before dinner service. Her stomach dropped, but her face stayed calm. The seal was wrong. Too glossy. Too fresh. And the corner of Marco's signet ring carried the same smear of black wax. Lucian saw her notice it. She knew he did because the entire room seemed to narrow around his paws. "Back kitchen," Lucian said softly. "Not a rescue. Not a verdict. A test." Marco stepped close enough that his sleeve brushed Evie's arm, his voice dropping into something uglier than a shout. "Careful, sweetheart. A woman your size should know better than to take up space in a man's world." Evie did not answer. She only turned toward the kitchen, broad shoulders squared, every eye following the woman they had mistaken for cornered. Behind her, the deadbolt clicked shut. The deadbolt clicked shut, and Evie understood that Marco had not brought them to the back kitchen to prove a theft. He had brought them there because the room was narrow, windowless, and full of men who expected her to fold under pressure. The freezer hummed behind her. The black-sealed crate sat beside the freezer door like a planted corpse, glossy wax catching the cold light. Lucian stood near the sink, silent and sharp in his dark coat, while his bodyguards took the door and Marco drifted too close to Evie's side, smiling as if the humiliation had already done its work. "Open it," Marco said. "Let everyone see what the hungry girl dragged home." Evie's cheeks burned, but her hand stayed calm. She did not reach for the crate. She reached for a clean towel first, wiped the condensation from the black wax seal, and tilted her head. "That's funny," she said softly. Marco's smile twitched. "What is? Wax doesn't sweat." The room went still. Evie crouched with effort but without apology, her large body filling the space between the men and the crate, her broad shoulders blocking Marco's easy view. Years of being watched had taught her how to make people uncomfortable by refusing to move faster for them. She ran one finger along the seal, then lifted it to the light. This was pressed less than an hour ago. Real freight wax goes dull in cold storage. This is still glossy. Lucian's eyes lowered to her hand. Not to judge it, to study it. Marco stepped forward. "She's stalling." "No," Evie said, and for the first time her voice cut through the kitchen harder than the knives hanging over the butcher block. "I'm making sure the lie is clean before you ask me to bleed for it." A server peering through the half-open pass-through sucked in a breath. One of Lucian's bodyguards shifted his weight, suddenly less certain of where the danger stood. Marco's face hardened. "Move." He grabbed Evie's arm. It was not a shove meant to hurt badly. It was worse. It was casual, entitled, the touch of a man who believed a woman like her could be repositioned like furniture. Something old and hot flashed through her. Evie planted her feet. Her weight settled deep into the tile, solid and immovable, the same body they mocked becoming the reason Marco could not budge her an inch. His grip slipped first. His polished shoe skidded on the damp floor. The crate cracked against the freezer threshold, and a chemical smell burst into the air, sharp beneath the salt. Ammonia. Evie saw Lucian's left hand move toward his coat. She saw Marco's right hand go not to the crate, but to the towel rack where he thought her oyster knife was hidden. And suddenly everything inside her went quiet. She caught Marco's wrist with both hands, twisted down, and drove her hip into his balance point. He hit the prep table with a grunt. The oyster knife slid free from beneath the folded towel near the sink. A bodyguard raised his gun. Lucian said one word. "Wait." Marco cursed and shoved Evie hard toward Lucian, trying to turn her body into chaos, trying to make the armed men see only movement and panic. But Evie did not fight the momentum. She used it. She turned with the force, caught Lucian's reaching wrist before he could step between her and the crate, and drove him back against the steel table before anyone understood she had changed targets. For one breathtaking second, the mafia boss was pinned beneath the strength everyone had mistaken for softness, his white collar exposed, and Evie's blade rested just beneath his throat. The kitchen died. No whispers. No laughter. No one even breathed. Evie's chest rose hard, but her voice stayed low. "Your man is selling your peer," she whispered. "And this crate is how he planned to bury the proof. The crate is leaking ammonia because it was never packed for freight. It was packed to destroy evidence." Lucian did not blink. A thin red line appeared where the knife touched him. Evie looked past his shoulder at Marco, whose confidence had finally cracked. "And he knew exactly where my knife was because he planted the crate himself." Lucian's gaze stayed on Evie, dark and unreadable, but his body had gone completely, still beneath her control. Then he asked, almost gently, "What else did you see, Miss Marlowe? What else did you see, Miss Marlowe?" Lucian asked, and the way he said her name changed the temperature of the kitchen. Not softer, not kind, more dangerous than that. Deliberate. Evie kept the blade at his throat for one heartbeat longer. Not because she wanted to hurt him, but because every man in that room needed to understand she had not survived this long by obeying fear on command. Then she lowered the knife and stepped back, breathing hard, her full body steadying itself like a ship after impact. No one laughed now. No one looked at her like furniture. They looked at her hands, her shoulders, the space she occupied without apology, and for the first time that night, the room seemed to make room for her instead of wishing she would shrink. Marco wiped sweat from his upper lip. "She's manipulating you," he snapped. "She's a cook." Lucian did not look away from Evie. "Answer the question." Evie set the oyster knife on the prep table where everyone could see it, handle turned away from her. "A boundary. A choice. The crate was planted after dinner service," she said. "Whoever brought it in knew my freezer lock sticks, knew which towel I keep knives under, and knew your men would search fast, not carefully." Her voice was quiet, but each word landed with a clean weight of evidence. Marco knew all three. A bodyguard glanced toward Marco before he could stop himself. That tiny betrayal of instinct did more damage than an accusation. Lucian saw it. Evie saw him see it. His gaze moved over her, not with the lazy cruelty she was used to, not measuring softness as weakness, but reading discipline in the way she stood after humiliation, reading courage in the way she refused to beg. "Why didn't you call the police?" he asked. The test was sharp enough to cut. Evie almost smiled, though there was no humor in it. "Because police cars come after bodies on this pier, not before. And because if I ran to them with your container code, Marco would say exactly what he said out there. Fat broke girl, dead father, failing restaurant, easy thief." The words scraped her throat, but she did not let them own her. "I kept the numbers because numbers don't care what I look like." The silence that followed was different. Embarrassed. Heavy. One of the servers lowered her eyes. Lucian's hand moved once, a small gesture toward his nearest guard. "Step away from her." The guard obeyed instantly. It was not a rescue. Not yet. But it shifted the room's gravity. Marco was no longer the man closest to Evie. Lucian was. He picked up the black wax seal with a napkin, studied the smear, then looked at Marco's signet ring. "You brought me here to watch her break," Lucian said. Marco's mouth opened. Lucian's voice dropped. She didn't. Something almost like panic flashed across Marco's face. Evie caught it, along with the faint vibration of Lucian's phone on the steel table. The screen lit up with an unknown number and a photo attachment. Evie saw only part of it before Lucian turned the phone. Her younger sister's red scarf, tied around a freezer handle at the old South Dock warehouse. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her, but she did not reach for the counter. Lucian watched her face change and understood the new shape of the trap. When his eyes came back to hers, they were no longer testing whether she mattered. They were calculating who would dare to aim at her. "You're not going home alone," he said. Evie lifted her chin, fear burning clean behind her eyes. "I'm not asking permission to save my sister." Lucian paused, and for the first time, the pause felt like respect. "Good," he said. "Then you're coming with me." "Then you're coming with me," Lucian said, and the kitchen reacted before Evie did. One server gasped. One bodyguard looked at her as if a woman who had just held a knife to his boss's throat should have been dragged out in zip ties, not escorted like evidence too valuable to lose. Evie wiped her palm on her apron, not because she was weak, but because fear had made her skin slick and she refused to let anyone see the tremor win. "I'll come," she said, lifting her chin, her large body still planted between the crate and the men who had tried to make her small. "But I don't sit in the back like cargo, and nobody touches me unless I say so." A flicker moved through Lucian's eyes. Not anger. Approval buried deep enough to be deniable. He turned his head slightly. No one touches her. The order was quiet, but it struck the room like a locked door. Marco's face twisted. "You're giving orders for her now?" Lucian finally looked at him. "I'm giving orders around her." That single difference changed everything. Evie felt the shift in the room, subtle but undeniable. The waitress who had doubted her stepped aside first. Then the bodyguards. Then the customers visible through the pass-through, their whispers dying as Evie walked out of her own kitchen beside the most feared man on Blackwater Pier. Her hips brushed the doorway. Her shoulder nearly grazed Lucian's sleeve. She did not apologize for either. Outside, the rain was cold and hard, bouncing off the black hood of an armored SUV waiting at the curb. Lucian opened the rear door himself. Not gallant, strategic, controlled. Still, every man on the sidewalk noticed. Evie noticed them noticing. "This doesn't mean I trust you," she said as she climbed in, the leather seat dipping beneath her weight, her presence filling the back of the car with salt, steel, and shaken courage. Lucian slid in beside her, close enough that his coat brushed her arm, far enough not to crowd her. "Good," he said. "Trust gets people killed when they hand it out too early." The door shut, sealing them inside tinted glass and engine heat. Forced closeness made the silence sharper. Evie could smell rain in his wool, expensive cologne beneath gunmetal, and the faint iron of the cut she had left on his throat. She looked at it once, and then away. "Your sister's name?" he said. "Nora." Evie answered. Her voice almost broke, but she caught it. "Nora Marlowe, 22. She runs deliveries when I can't afford another driver." Lucian tapped the partition. A screen lit up in the console, showing Blackwater Pier from above. Warehouse grids, container lanes, locked gates, cold storage units glowing red on a digital map. He handed Evie a slim access card with a black Bellandy crest. The bodyguard in the front seat looked over his shoulder, stunned. Lucian ignored him. "Choose the warehouse." Evie stared at the card. It was not rescue. It was entry. A dangerous little piece of his world placed in her hand because he needed what she saw. Her thumb moved over the map. "Not the big warehouse," she said. "That's what Marco wants you to hit. Too obvious." The scarf was tied to an old freezer handle, the kind with a rusted crescent latch. South Dock Warehouse has new handles. But Cold Unit 9 still has the old ones because the city condemned it and nobody paid to replace them. Lucian watched her, utterly still. "You know condemned buildings by their freezer handles?" "I know every place my father delivered ice after midnight," Evie said. "And I know Marco never pays to fix anything he can use as a trap." The corner of Lucian's mouth almost moved. Almost. Then his phone buzzed again. This time the image loaded fully. Nora's red scarf on a freezer handle, and behind it, painted in black across the frost-covered wall, were 4 words meant only for Evie. "Bring the fat girl. Bring the fat girl." The words glowed on Lucian's phone while the armored SUV cut through the rain toward Cold Unit 9, and for one breath, Evie felt the old shame try to crawl back into her skin. Marco had not written her name. He had written the insult, as if her body were the only thing worth identifying, as if the woman who had spotted his lie held Lucian Bellandy at knife point, and found the right warehouse by a freezer handle still did not deserve to be called human. Evie closed her fingers around the black access card until its edge bit her palm. "He wants me angry," she said. Lucian's eyes stayed on the message. "He wants you scared." Evie looked out at the sodium lights bleeding across the wet container yard. Then he should have picked a smaller room. Cold Unit 9 crouched at the end of the south dock like a condemned animal, its metal siding streaked with rust, its loading bay chained but not locked. Lucian's men wanted to breach first. Evie stopped them with one raised hand. The bodyguards looked to Lucian, offended by instinct. Lucian did not hesitate. Her call. That was the first real crack in the old order. Men with guns stepped back for the woman Marco had called too big to belong. Evie moved forward, broad shoulders squared under her rain-dark apron, her large body impossible to miss beneath the warehouse lights. She was frightened. She was shaking inside, but she had spent her whole life being stared at, and tonight she used it. Every eye followed her while her mind worked. The chain was clean. The latch was rusted. The frost line under the door was broken on the left side. "No one cut through here," she whispered. They dragged something out. A muffled cry came from inside. Nora. Evie's breath caught, but she did not rush. Rushing was how traps swallowed people. She pressed her ear to the door and heard the faint hiss beneath the freezer hum. "Ammonia. Too much of it. Don't shoot in there," she said. "One spark, and we all become evidence." Marco's voice crackled from a speaker hidden somewhere in a bay. "Still pretending you run the room, Evie? Open the door and crawl in, where your sister freezes wondering why you were too heavy to hurry." Lucian went still beside her. Not calm. Lethal. His hand moved once, and 4 guns rose toward the shadows. Evie touched his wrist. The entire dock seemed to hold its breath. "Not your way," she said. "My building. My rules." For a second, every man waited to see whether Lucian Bellandi would tolerate being stopped. He looked at her hand on his wrist, then at the door, then back at her. "Tell me." Evie pointed to the side service panel half buried behind warped plywood. "Manual vent release. My father used to curse it every winter. It sticks unless someone holds the outer lever down while another person pulls from inside." One guard tried it and failed. Another cursed. The lever barely moved. Evie stepped in before they could argue, planted both feet in the rainwater, wrapped her full arms around the iron handle, and pulled with her whole body. Her weight, her strength, the same softness Marco had mocked, became an anchor against the jammed steel. The lever screamed. The vent shutters opened 6 inches. "Now," she gasped. Lucian's men flooded through the side door without firing. Marco tried to run from the rear exit with a phone in one hand and Lucian's ledger drive in the other. Nora stumbled out coughing, wrists bound, and Evie caught her before she hit the concrete, folding her sister against the solid shelter of her body. But Evie's eyes were on Marco's phone, still recording, still connected to the dock office feed. On the screen was a live transfer, Bellandi route codes, Marco's signet authorization, and arrival account name blinking beside the upload bar. Evie reached past Nora, grabbed the nearest dock hook, and slammed its metal tip through the junction box on the wall. The lights died. The upload froze at 98%. In the emergency red glow, Marco's face finally lost its smile. Lucian looked from the frozen screen to Evie, then to every armed man who had just watched a plus-size restaurant owner save her sister, stop a chemical trap, and preserve the evidence his own people had missed. "Photograph that screen," Evie said, voice raw but steady, "before he remembers how to lie." No one moved until Lucian gave one small nod. Then the entire dock obeyed her. The entire dock obeyed her, and Marco Varelli heard it before he understood it. Phones came up. Cameras clicked. One of Lucian's men photographed the frozen transfer screen, then another copied the ledger drive before Marco could lunge for it. In the emergency red glow, the truth looked almost simple. Bellandi route codes, Marco's signet authorization, arrival account, and an upload stopped 2 seconds before it erased the proof. The men who had laughed at Evie Marlowe in her own restaurant now stared at the evidence like it had teeth. Marco backed toward the loading bay, rain blowing in behind him. "She set this up," he said, but his voice had lost its silk. "Look at her. She's desperate. She's broke. She'd say anything to climb out of that kitchen." Evie stood with Nora tucked against her side, her large body steady despite the cold, despite the fear, despite the insult trying one last time to make her small. Her apron was soaked, her pale arms marked with rust and rain, her hair coming loose around her face. She did not look polished. She looked undeniable. "I didn't climb out of my kitchen," she said quietly. You drag your crime into it. The silence that followed was the kind that ruins men. Lucian took Marco's phone from his guard, glanced once at the screen, then looked to the dock's supervisor standing pale beside the freight office. Freeze every Varelli contract on Blackwater Pier. Marco's face changed. Lucian continued, voice low, almost bored. Lock his accounts tied to Bellandi Freight. Cancel his access codes. Pull his men off the gate list. Anyone who moves cargo for him after tonight loses the pier. No one argued. Marco looked to his own men and found them stepping back. Not far, not dramatically, just enough to show the whole dock that loyalty had become dangerous. Then Lucian turned the phone so every camera could see the rival account name blinking above Marco's authorization. You brought me here to watch her be humiliated, Lucian said. Instead, you made her the witness who ended you. Marco's mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. Evie watched him lose the room he thought belonged to men like him. She should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt tired, furious, and free in a way that made her chest ache. Lucian looked at her then, not asking permission to punish Marco, but giving her the space to decide what part of the ending belonged to her. Evie stepped forward. Men moved aside, not because Lucian ordered them, because she was walking. You called me hungry, she said to Marco. You were right. I was hungry to keep my father's name alive. Hungry to protect my sister. Hungry to stop apologizing for the space I take up. Her voice did not shake, but I was never hungry enough to sell my soul for a peer. Marco lowered his eyes first. That was the immediate justice. 3 weeks later, Marlowe's salt house reopened under chandelier light and winter rain, but the old cracked sign was gone. In its place, black iron letters read Marlowe's at Blackwater Pier. Marco's name had vanished from every gate list on the coast, and the men who once laughed with him now pretended they had never known how his voice sounded. The dining room was packed with dock bosses, lawyers, city officials, and the same merino wives who once whispered into wine glasses. This time, when Evie entered, conversation did not mock her. It stopped for her. She wore deep navy velvet that moved over her full, soft body like midnight water, every curve lit by gold, every step slow and grounded. She took up space beautifully, dangerously, without apology. Lucian Bellandi waited at the head table in a black suit, the thin scar at his throat barely visible above his collar. When a port commissioner tried to speak past Evie to Lucian about warehouse approvals, Lucian did not answer. He placed the Blackwater access ledger, the pier's seal, and the cold Unit 9 property deed in front of Evie. Ask her, he said. The room shifted. Eyes lowered. Chairs moved back. Men who had once treated her like kitchen noise now waited for her approval to move freight through her own docks. Lucian stood beside her, not in front of her, and his voice carried through the room with quiet finality. This peer missed what she saw. My men missed what she knew. From tonight on, Evelyn Marlowe, stand to the right hand of my empire. Evie looked at the seal, then at the room, then at the man who had come to intimidate her and stayed to watch her rise. She picked up the ledger pen with the same hand that had once held a knife to his throat. Then let's make the rules cleaner than the men who broke them, she said. Lucian smiled, small and lethal, and bent just enough to kiss her knuckles in front of everyone who had ever expected her to shrink. No one laughed. No one whispered. The woman they had called too big for a man's world had become the reason the room made space. If this moment hit you, like the video, subscribe for more dark mafia romance stories, and tell me in the comments which scene made you feel Evie's power the most.